Tonight we need to go on and tell more about the Mediterranean world, and we want to sweep through this big long story way back there in the beginning, as we talked about last week, 2000, and come right down to the great age of Greece, the great age of Athens, which of course is 450 BC in the Acropolis. Here's our map of the Mediterranean. We know that we're talking about that northeast corner of the Mediterranean. And in this new world, a specific part of the Mediterranean became the most productive. Why? Hard to say. It wasn't in the old Greece. It wasn't in the mainland. The mainland was probably harmed by volcanoes and earthquakes and invasions and plagues. And so the refugees came to the coast of Asia Minor and began to build new cities, whole new cities on this coast of Asia Minor. Cities like Miletus, Ephesus, Smyrna, Halicarnassus, that was the home of Herodotus. These new cities, new states, new cultures that would be just beginning. They'd just be beginning in 1000 BC, 900 BC, 800 BC. And so by 800 BC, you were beginning to see a vigorous, commercially productive new culture, which of course is the second iteration of our Greek culture, the second story. The Asia Minor city-states in this map, you can see right here. And in this picture, we look across to the coast of Asia Minor, to the coastal area where these city-states are located. Miletus, Ephesus, Smyrna, Halicarnassus, about a dozen great cities. And these cities are going to be very, very important in the future of Greece, because here now, from 800 to 700 to 600 to 500, this new world was going to build something new that was Greek and Greek-speaking and Greek languages, but had the vigor of a new, fresh start, just exactly the way the American colonies have a kind of vigorous new start in 1620. The exact same thing, bringing the old culture with you. So from the old world in the Mayflower, you bring the language, you bring the stories, you bring the books. You go to new land, you face new challenges, new weather, and therefore you build something new. And so that's exactly what happened in this new world of the coast of Asia Minor. And most important for us tonight is what we talked about last week, Homer. Homer lives in one of these city-states, Smyrna. He was very likely royalty, maybe aristocracy from the top, and had a great skill, language, travel, knowledge, all kinds of advantages. And so he then becomes the bridge from the old world of the heroes to the still-to-be-built new world in the Athens of Sophocles and Pericles. He's the bridge. Get it? He's the bridge. 780, 770, 760, but somewhere there in those 700s. And what does he have? Alphabetic writing, so he can write down the stories, which we talked about last week. Write down the stories, alphabetic writing, papyrus to write them on, the skill with stories and writing, a great writer, a great scene builder, a great editor, a great eye to how it should read. And so he took the old stories, and he wrote them down, and he then handed those stories to all the successive generations of Greece, and those stories will carry in them the values and the ideas that the new Greek culture will embrace. So it's ideas and values of an old world, 1700, 1600, 1500 BC, filtered through the voice of a brilliant writer in 750 or so. Same thing is happening in Israel now, remember. Exact same thing. The prophets, the writers, the poets, they're writing down their stories. They're writing down the Jewish stories. Exactly same time, with the same alphabet, different language, same alphabet. They'll write down those stories, and they will produce their literature, and the Greeks will produce the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so what we want to talk about now is the bridge from Homer to that new world, and just discuss some of the ideas that he and his book, or really the Greek book, the book that becomes a Greek Bible, hand along to later ages. And of course, it's these two books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Here's, of course, the place that we're talking about. This place, this set of ideals, and how this place stood for all these ideas that we're going to talk about right now. Athens. Here's a good map of the makeup of the Greek mainland and the islands. And the reason that it helps us now is for us to mention the most important event that will take place between Homer and Sophocles. The most important event that takes place in that 400 years, say from 800 down to 400, are the Persian Wars, or the Persian-Greek Wars, or the war between the Persians and the Greeks. To the east of Greece, there was the Persian Empire, enormously successful and huge, in control of all of Iran and Iraq and beyond into Afghanistan and some of India, through the Middle East and Egypt, controlling Egypt, and down into the deserts and further. So that it was the biggest empire of that time, 500 BC, 400. And the Persian emperor, Darius, who's in our picture, decided that all the problems that he was having in his empire in the coast of Asia Minor with those Greek city-states. Those Greek city-states were on what he considered his territory. Miletus, Ephesus, Smyrna, Halicarnassus, that coast right down next to his picture there. He considered those were his properties, and those city-states, which had been tolerated over a period of time, were obstreperous and difficult, and so he was sick and tired of all that Greek trouble, and so he decided to discipline them. And when he did, the Greek cousins back in Athens and the other city-states, they helped their Greek friends on the coast of Asia Minor. And so war broke out between the Persians and the Greeks. And by 500, Darius had concluded that the right way to discipline the Greeks was to invade Greece itself and conquer the most important cities in Greece, including Athens. He would go all the way to Athens with an army of 1 million men. 1 million men, horses, elephants, and hundreds of ships that would be manned with thousands and thousands of soldiers, that those ships would go to the coast, and he would march his 1 million man army across a bridge of boats across the Bosporus. They would march right along across the boats. They would put dirt down and everything so the horses couldn't see the water. And he would march the whole army across the Bosporus and into Greece, up through what was called Thrace, Thrace, Thessaloniki, and then down the peninsula and conquer Athens. That was the plan. And so, around 500, the Greeks now faced the biggest test in all their history. The biggest test in all their history, and the biggest test, in a way, in all of Eastern Mediterranean history. Why? Because the vision of government and life that the Persian emperor held was one of one-man rule. Tyranny, the Greeks call it. Tyranny. No freedom. No councils, no elections, no democrats. This was just tyranny. One-man rule in the biggest empire that anybody knew at that time. And the Greeks were the exact opposite. The Greeks were a community of dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of little independent states, each of which had its own constitution, its own idea of rule, different ways of running it, councils, elections, democracies, oligarchies, and from their point of view, that's the way it should work. And so here was then this confrontation at around 500 between the greatest empire run by one brilliant emperor named Darius and his armies and his navies and all the little tiny Greek city-states that had a different idea. And so in this moment of around 500 BC, you have one of the most important tests ever for Western civilization, one of the most important tests ever on the issue of human freedom. If the Greeks had lost, then everything we're talking about here would be canceled. We would have to be telling you a whole other story. None of this would be here. We'd be telling you the story of the Persian tradition. We would be doing a class in the Persian tradition here in Cupertino. It would be a huge success. The room would be packed with admirers of the Persian tradition. But that's not what happened. And for the good of the future of this class, I'm glad that's not what happened, because I have more to tell you about the crisis. So around 500 then, we see the first great, it doesn't have to be actually the first, there's some other great tests, but certainly one of the most important tests in the history of the Western tradition, the confrontation between the Persian Empire and the Greeks. And the period between 500 and 490 will be the critical one, where Darius and his armies enter into northern Greece. Up there on the map you can actually see the route, come down the peninsula, and come very close to Athens with overwhelming numerical superiority. No one expected that the Greeks would be able to stop them. They were way, way, way inferior numbers, and the Persian Empire had essentially walked to this point down through the Greek peninsula. And then there took place one of the most famous battles in all of history, called the Battle of Marathon. And at the Battle of Marathon, the huge numbers of the Persians did them no good, and the brilliant skill of the Greeks won, held out, stopped them. How far is Marathon from Athens? So, at the conclusion of the battle, the young runner ran all the way to Athens to tell them, we won! We won. We won. Athens won. Greece won. Democracies won. Small city-states won. Great, big, huge, massive empire of 1 million men was stopped. Now, that wasn't the end of it. They came back. They fought again in 480. Another Persian emperor came again and fought again, destroyed Athens, but still lost the battle. So it's essentially a 50-year war, a war that goes on from 500 BC down to 450 later, and the Greeks won and won and won again, and each time you can see on the map some of the different battles, including a naval battle just in view of Athens, and a number of other great land battles. But the final outcome, the thing that we care about, is that by 450, Athens and Greece had stopped the Persian invasion.